Good morning, everybody, and you're very welcome to this third in MyMind's webinar series, designed to be a practical support to people dealing with the daily challenges of living with COVID-19. My name is Gráinne O'Rourke, and I am Head of Communications at MyMind, and I'd like to welcome you all here this morning, giving freely of your time to join us for this conversation. And I really appreciate the fact that so many of you have attended the webinars up to now and are attending today, because I know that everybody is very busy, particularly in the run up to the Christmas. So we really appreciate that. So before we get started, a couple of little housekeeping things just to mention. One is that this event is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel probably towards the middle of next week, but you will receive an email from Eventbrite probably around the middle of next week with a link to the video on our YouTube channel. And that's useful for people who maybe are not able to attend the entire event today, or who want to go back and look at some of the really interesting practices that Vincent is going to talk with us about today. The other thing I would mention is, obviously we're in a technological environment here, so anything could go wrong, and sometimes it does. So please do bear with us, and we'll do the best we can to rectify anything if it arises. So without further ado, I'm now going to hand you over to Vincent Ryan, who is going to talk to you today about dealing with loneliness and isolation.
So thank you, Gráinne, for that, and thank you to everyone who's turned up today. You're very welcome. As Gráinne was saying there, my name is Vincent Ryan. I'm a psychotherapist with MyMind, and I've been with MyMind for a few months now. And yeah, you know, this is I think a good opportunity to talk about an important topic today. So it's loneliness and isolation is what we're looking at. So I'll just let's just see what we're going to be looking at exactly. So we're going to be talking about our human nature, our common human nature, what we all have in common, you know, as humans, as social beings. And we're going to look at what is loneliness as a kind of a difficult experience for a social species, a species who need to connect and be attached to each other for support and belonging. We're going to look more closely then at the experience of loneliness. What exactly is it like as a feeling in the body, in the mind? Kind of examine that more closely. Then we're going to turn to practical solutions. So, you know, how do we approach this and find ways to connect to others when it maybe isn't so easy? And then we're going to look at what else we can do for ourselves to support ourselves at this time when there's a lot of isolation with COVID-19. So without further ado, we'll just begin to look at this conversation we're now having as a society, as a culture. We've begun to talk about loneliness, and maybe that's a good thing, that we're kind of getting over the stigma gradually, that we can actually have a conversation about this. So it's coming up more and more in the news, and there's research being done on it. And of course, with COVID, loneliness there's an increase in it because of the isolation that we have to face to prevent spread of the virus, and with cocooning and people working remotely and so on, this is driving up loneliness, this kind of isolation that we're facing. And also, of course, it's not always just about isolation. You know, we can be in a crowd or among people and also feel lonely. So there is a relationship between isolation and loneliness, but it's a connection rather than an absolute overlap. I just pulled out one statistic here that the CSO reported, that 1 in 4 adults, young adults, 25%, felt lonely all or most of the time over the past 2 weeks. And this finding has been repeated a few times, where it's actually young people are among the most affected by loneliness, which might be surprising because we probably tend to think of loneliness as something that might affect older people, but actually it affects people of all ages, all demographics. So it's just, you know, to be aware of that as well. So this is the kind of context of the talk, is just to begin to remind ourselves of why loneliness is an issue. It's because we're a social species. Like we can see here, just like gorillas, just like wolves, like many species in the sea. You can see the children here. Just we're naturally, we actually connect. We grow up in families, we work together, we learn together. We're doing this as a group together. We're a very social species, perhaps one of the most social species on Earth. And we form attachments. We attach to our children attach to us. We form attachments to our friends, our family, our colleagues. So attachment and bonds is just really a part of being human. So John Baldy here was a great psychologist, and he wrote a lot about human attachment, connection, and bonds. And he reminds us that, I regard the desire to be loved and cared for as being an integral part of human nature throughout adult life, as well as earlier. And that the expression of such desires is to be expected in every grown-up, especially in times of sickness or calamity. So I think what's really interesting about this quote here from John Bowlby is that, particularly in times of sickness or calamity, everybody kind of has this need for love and connection, to feel cared for and to care for others. And this applies no matter what age we are, from the cradle to the grave. This is John Cassioppo, who did a wonderful TED Talk. I really recommend anyone who's interested in loneliness and to look at this researcher's work. He did a lovely TED Talk in 2013. He's passed away since, actually, unfortunately. But he did a wonderful TED Talk on the pain and the lethality of loneliness, how damaging loneliness actually is for us. It's really bad for our physical health. It's really bad for our mental health. And he really names it here. He talks about pain. I'll read out the quote here. Pain motivates us to take care of our physical body. It's like physical pain. But the pain and aversiveness of loneliness, feeling isolated from those around you, is also part of a biological early warning machinery to alert you to threats and damage to your social body, which you also need to survive and prosper. So I love this idea of the social body, like that we also, as we have a physical body, we have a social body which kind of longs for connection, that needs connection. And when we don't have that, feels really threatening, actually. It feels like there's kind of damage being done. It hurts, like, to not have that connection. So what it's doing there is it's a signal calling to us to address that need. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. What's that need? Here we have a quote here. It's a definition of loneliness, a psychological definition. Loneliness is a state of distress or discomfort that results when one perceives a gap between one's desires for social connection and actual experiences of it. So I suppose here the key word I think here is the idea of the gap. So we have a need, and we have a natural, innate, inborn need for connection and belonging. And when there's a lack of that, when we're feeling like, gosh, I just don't feel close enough to people, or I'm not seeing friends or family, yeah, there's a gap there, and that causes that kind of that suffering and that pain. So then let's look at this experience of loneliness a little bit more closely. So it's a painful internal experience. As John Cassioppo reminds us, it's a kind of aversive, it's a warning sign to say, hey, this is a problem. This not seeing people or feeling kind of very isolated is a real problem. It's a signal of unmet needs in our social body. And loneliness can be often a mix of emotions. It can be really, really blended between like things like fear, hurt, sadness, anger, numbness, abandonment. It can be bitterness, envy, shame, guilt, powerlessness, helplessness, hopelessness. I had to say, as a psychotherapist, this is often what I hear. It's just the pain of loneliness comes through in a whole mix of very, very, very difficult emotions to sit with and to know what to do about. And it can be very disabling, and it can be kind of there can be a kind of a stopping or not knowing how to move forward with that. That can be very, very disabling for someone. So now we're going to turn to a poem here. I'm going to listen to this poem by Mary Oliver. It's called Wild Geese. And in it, I think she captures some of these kind of feelings or these ideas, and there's some beautiful imagery. There's also some lovely stuff in it as well about nature and connection too. So it's a lovely poem, and I'm just going to...
Wild Geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese high in the clean blue air are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things.
So I'd just like to invite everyone just to notice, how that resonates for you personally. I think it's a very, very evocative poem. So just maybe just to notice what that, how that resonates, what that evokes for you as we continue on. So now we're going to kind of look at more practical solutions as well here. Like what can we do to reconnect with others when we find ourselves feeling lonely? So I think the most obvious one is to look at our interests and hobbies. Like what lights you up? Like what do you find really interesting or like doing? Like it could be some sport, it could be music, it could be a certain type of literature. I mean, the list is endless. And whatever you're interested in, when you find other people who like that topic, we just connect on the topic, and then we can connect in a deeper way, I think, through that. So that's a really obvious one. Volunteering is something, again, that is really, really obvious, but maybe we don't always think of, particularly when we're feeling very lonely. It might kind of come to mind. But there's always, like, demand for people to pitch in, to join in, to help out. Actually, Christmas time comes to mind as well. Like, around Christmas time, there's often a need for volunteering. There's another thing that I think that maybe people mightn't be so aware of, which is online retreats. Like, for example, Dzogchen Bera in West Cork, it's a Buddhist center, but it's Buddhist, but anyone can go along, and there's online retreats there on loving kindness, mindfulness. Very interesting and well worth checking out their website to see what they're running this season. And finally, like time in nature, I think personally, and I think for many people, is a wonderful way to connect to self, to the natural world, and to others, where we can social distance and still get out and get some fresh air. Then we're going to look at finding support, where it's perhaps even more difficult. Maybe for whatever reason we can't get out, or we're just needing a lot of help with feeling very, very lonely. And alone, the organization alone have a befriending network where you can contact them and they can kind of link you up with somebody. And it could be kind of dropping in for a cup of tea. I know there's a certain amount of social isolation happening right now, and there's cocooning and so on. But like, looking forward, it might be a phone call, it could be a video chat, but well worth contacting alone. Samaritans do wonderful work. Aware, these organizations have trained volunteers, and they offer this listening service, and they offer this support and connection, where if you're feeling very, very alone, very isolated, and that's really biting in, you can connect to somebody and they'll be there to listen and to support. There's also a great website, turntome.ie, who have these different kind of support forums. You can join those, ones for depression, anxiety, bereavement, and so forth. Well worth checking out that website, Turn to Me, where you can kind of join in and get support from others and offer support to others who may be struggling with similar things to yourself. And then finally, the HSE have set up a new service. It's a text-based service. It's 24/7, and you can text hello to 5088, and then you'll get a volunteer there who will link in with you and check in how you do and what's happening. Do you need to talk? So that's well worth being aware of as well. So now we're going to kind of change direction slightly and go towards, what can help us in ourselves, in our connection to self, because often when we feel very lonely, we miss others, but we can also feel kind of like we've lost connection with ourselves. It's a strange thing that kind of, I think, can happen. We can feel kind of a bit dislocated from ourselves. So this man, Carl Rogers, was a very famous psychologist, psychotherapist, and he said, the curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. And I picked out this quote because I think often loneliness can lead us to feel quite ashamed and self-rejecting. And I hear this as well as a counselor and psychotherapist. So it is kind of like this piece of kind of trying, how do I go about maybe accepting that this is difficult and this is happening for me? That actually can kind of help us to change, to move forward. So we're going to look at this idea of self-acceptance a bit more closely. So radical acceptance is something that Tara Brach talks about. Tara Brach is a wonderful psychotherapist who does a lot of great stuff on YouTube. And she's written a book on radical acceptance. And here's a quote: "Clearly recognizing what we are feeling in the present moment and regarding that experience with compassion is what radical acceptance is." So there's like two parts to this. It's recognizing what we are feeling in the present moment. That's the first piece, particularly when it's difficult, and regarding that experience with compassion. So we're going to look at that a little bit more closely. What is that about, recognizing what we're feeling, and how do we approach that with compassion? So this is another piece that Tara Brach talks about as well, which is this idea of the two arrows of pain and suffering. And this actually comes from Buddhism originally, but she's adapted it a bit. So what are these two arrows? So the first arrow is the pain of loneliness. It's the core feelings of sadness, anger, fear, panic, whatever is coming up. But there's this idea of this second arrow of suffering. That's kind of another layer that can sometimes get laid on top of the original pain of loneliness. And what's the suffering? So the suffering can be the limiting story we sometimes tell ourselves about our personality and the beliefs we form about our self-worth. So this is something that sometimes can get laid on top of the loneliness, which can be extra painful and actually be a kind of suffering that Tara Brach is kind of reminding us to kind of notice that, you know, we can separate these two pieces out, and that can be useful. This is Paul Gilbert. He's an expert in self-compassion. He says, commonly compassion is defined as being sensitive to suffering of self and others with a deep commitment to try and prevent and relieve it. So again, there's this idea of these two pieces of being sensitive and recognizing one's own suffering, one's own pain. And then also, like, what am I going to do now to try to prevent or relieve it? Or how am I going to address it? So it's not just about feeling it. It's also about inquiring into, well, what do I need? What do I need to do here? What would help? What would be supportive? That's what compassion actually is. That kindness is to say, there's something happening here. There's something that needs to be addressed, and it's time to take some kind of action to address it. This is Christianneph, and she's another expert in compassion. She says, when we're in touch with our common humanity, we remember that feelings of inadequacy and disappointment are universal. So this is the funny kind of almost like paradox of loneliness. I think when we feel very, very lonely, we feel like we're the only person in the wide earthly world who feels lonely. It's like, you know, I alone know this feeling. But what Christianneph is pointing out here is it's actually the complete opposite. You know, we actually are connected by this universal sense that comes up from time to time and come up in a very strong way in different points in our life of loneliness. So we're actually, you know, we actually share this experience. And she says here, or rather I paraphrase, we do belong, but we may not have simply lost sight of this truth for now. And I suppose I kind of just makes me recall the poem by Mary Oliver, this idea of being kind of a part of nature and part of the greater world, that sometimes different experiences can kind of lead us back into. And it's kind of inquiring into how do we do that sometimes when it's difficult. So we're coming towards the end of the talk now, and this is Peter Levine. He's an expert in body psychotherapy, somatic experiencing is his area. And he's good. We're going to watch a video by him now. And this video is really about connecting to oneself in a feeling way, in a comforting and supportive way, particularly when we're feeling lonely and there's really, really strong negative emotions coming up. So in other words, this again is a form of self-compassion, because we're recognizing that's difficult feelings. We're kind of acknowledging that. We're saying, yeah, this is really, really painful. I'm really feeling this now. But we're also bringing a kind of kindness and support in a felt sense. So we're going to watch this video now by Peter. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of guide us through that practice as a sort of an embodied meditation. So we're going to watch this now.
Okay. Here, you take your right hand and you put it here under your left arm on the side of the heart. Yeah, got it. And the other hand on the shoulder. And just to get a feeling Ruth and everybody else who's watching, what this feels like, what the sensation is like, not just of your hands, but of what's going on inside of your body. Most people report a settling. What this does, I believe, is it helps us become aware of our container. See, and we'll probably get into this a little bit more. The body is the container of all of our sensations and all of our feelings. It's all in the body. And this is the container of the body, is the kind of the outside of our body, our shoulders, the sides of our thorax and so forth. And when the person can feel the container, then the emotions and the sensations do not feel as overwhelming because they're being contained.
Okay, so we're going to actually, take what Peter has talked about here and just do it a little bit in a bit more depth. So we'll take maybe 5 or 10 minutes to do this, everybody. So if you'd just like to begin by just settling into your seat a little bit more deeply and just, finding whatever makes you feel a little bit more comfortable. You might want to readjust a little bit. Just if you'd like to just notice, take maybe a deeper breath and begin, if you haven't already, just try placing your hand there around the heart area, like Peter Levine was demonstrating. And just notice what that feels like. You may want to place your left hand on your shoulder. Just notice. All we're doing here is just noticing the body as a container for sensations and feelings. So we're slowing down here. You're doing a bit of head stuff earlier, talking about this topic. And we're just putting that to one side, dropping in a bit deeper. You might notice your breath a bit more now. You might notice sensations you hadn't been so aware of. So there's a kind of allowing here. This is the first step to the compassion we talked about. It's like allowing, recognizing, okay. Checking in, how am I feeling? It's like the first step. And we're doing something about this. Just notice what it's like to bring that contact, the hand to the heart, to self. It's like a signal to oneself that, hey, I'm showing up here for myself. I'm offering myself something, taking some time out from my day to nurture my, as Mary Oliver would say, the feeling body, soft on the body. I'm just going to be silent for a moment, that everybody just soak that up a little bit more. And then I'll come back. You may have closed your eyes. If you like, you may want to keep your eyes open, just gently soften your gaze. And just, this is a reminder of how you can show up for yourself and nurture yourself. Give yourself something of what you need in terms of contact and connection to yourself. and just, you know, just to remember this experience. You can come back to this anytime you like. This is always available to you as a resource, as a safe place to come back to. So I'm just going to gradually start to guide us back out of that experience now. Very, very gently. Your eyes are closed, maybe open your eyes. You might want to look around the room a little bit. That can be, you know, useful. Kind of just notice some colors, you know, some shapes. Remind yourself where you are. And yeah, just remembering that this is you showing up for yourself here today. Right, so thank you very, very much, everyone. And I'm just going to begin to hand you back to Grania now.
Thanks very much indeed, Vincent. And I have to say that was really fantastic. What interested me actually during the practice there was when you had little moments of silence. And I think in the modern world, we're not comfortable with silence. As a friend of mine who's also a psychotherapist said, Grania, don't be afraid of the silence. And it really stuck with me. That is a really profound statement, actually, because we're so busy. Our outer lives are so busy. Our heads are so busy. And we don't really do silence anymore. So thank you so much for that. And I, for one, really enjoyed the whole talk, and particularly that lovely poem, The Wild Geese. That is really beautiful. So Vincent, we have a couple of questions now which have come in. So first and foremost, somebody who lives alone, is not close to their family, the family lives abroad, and only has one friend at the moment here and barely sees them. And this person thinks that the lack of social interaction is driving them a bit mad. And they have already tried counselling and therapy, but it hasn't really worked for them. And they're wondering, what can you suggest for them to fill the gap and that void that they experience on a day-to-day basis?
So thank you very much for that question. And I really hear that it's been difficult for you. And I know, you know, counseling, psychotherapy, yeah, sometimes it's about finding the right fit. So, you know, maybe there's another therapist that would, you know, work better with you around this. But I think it's great that you're asking the question. Like having even one friend, I think is huge. You know, I think sometimes there's a saying like even one good person is massive. So like, you know, I suppose, you know, kind of, you know, recognizing that is great to hear that. I hear that, you know, your family are far away. I suppose, like, you know, is there a way you could reach out to them through maybe, I don't know, like, could you write them maybe a letter, or could you maybe think about the future? Like, I suppose, like, you know, we're looking at vaccines, and we're looking at, you know, kind of ways out of COVID now. So is there some way to maybe invite them over, or invite one of them over and say, look, I'd love you to come and visit? You know, so I really do hear that that's difficult. And I suppose, again, like, it's about looking at what are your interests? Like, what are your, like, what has lit you up? Maybe there's something you used to like that you've kind of lost interest in, that you could connect to others through. You know, maybe there's an activity or a hobby or an interest that you might be able to pick up again. So there's some ideas that kind of come to mind.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Vincent, and hopefully our questioner there got some help out of that. We have another from Graham. Graham is wondering, are there other authors or poets that you would recommend who deal with the kinds of issues that you discussed here today?
Yeah, it's a good question. Maybe when we put this up on YouTube, we can put this in the description. There's actually some lovely poems that are listed on John Kabat-Zinn's website. It's the MBSR one. I don't have it to hand, but I might be able to put it up on the YouTube description box. But in terms of poets, I think different poets kind of capture this in different ways. These experiences of loneliness. I suppose I suppose it's kind of like just kind of finding the poems that resonate for you, and I think that could be a good task or a good project to kind of go and seek out poems that resonate for you, and that in itself can be kind of a quest that might be an interesting one. And then when you find those poems, maybe to share them with people and say, hey, look, I found this really great poem that captures something about this experience. It could be a way to connect to others, actually. So there's just some ideas that come to mind. Graham.
Thanks a million, Vincent. And yeah, certainly Vincent will send me those pieces from John Kabat-Zinn, and we can include those in the YouTube description when we're putting the video up next week. So please do have a look out for that. The questions are coming thick and fast, Vincent, you'll be glad to know. It means people were awake anyway, which is good. So Pauline is wondering how to help someone else who you feel is struggling with loneliness due to the COVID restrictions, but they are so low that they don't want to engage with any of the things that you suggest. And Pauline is wondering, what can she do at a social distance as their friend to support them a bit better?
Yeah, thanks, Pauline. I mean, I think when we get to that point where we feel very low, or when there's a real it's just kind of overwhelming. Sometimes practical suggestions don't really land that well, because it can feel a bit like, well, there's a kind of, you don't really get it. So maybe what would be like just to try to really, tune into your friend and kind of really invite him or her to say, talk about the experience that they're going through. Because, being like heard and listened to and attuned to, responded to, is often what we need most when we're really kind of depressed or really lonely and really shut down. So obviously your intentions are good. There's no question about that. And making suggestions to your friend is good. But maybe to kind of go to your friend or to reach out to your friend, however that is, by email or by text or however you do it by phone, and say, listen, I get it that, this is really hard for you. So just, would you tell me more about what's happening for you? Because I don't want you to feel so alone with this experience of feeling alone. Because I think that's sometimes one of the big challenges, is when we feel alone and we feel so alone with those really painful experiences. And maybe the feeling is nobody will understand or nobody wants to know. So actually you giving her that message of, actually, I want to understand, and I don't want you to leave you. I don't want to leave you with this really painful feeling. I don't want to, I don't want you feeling like I'm going to abandon you in this feeling. It would actually be a beautiful gift to give your friend. So that's kind of what comes to mind, Pauline,
Thanks a million for that, Vincent. And we've another question which is not dissimilar from Elena. And she says, thanks for the tips on how to support oneself, but do you have any advice on how to support others, friends, family, who are suffering from loneliness and depression? And Elena finds this piece very hard.
Thanks, Elena. I think one of the things we're grappling with now is finding a way to talk about these experiences, like, depression, loneliness, anxiety. And I think this is something that we're still getting used to, and so actually making it safe to talk about what's really going on for other people is one of the best ways to do this. Maybe naming some of your own experience, even saying like, gosh, I found COVID hard, or gosh, I'm just noticing what's going on with people. Mental health is it's something that we're all talking about now. Maybe that's one of the gifts of COVID, is that, it's maybe a little easier to talk about mental health and talk about, anxiety and depression. So just kind of making that conversation safe and accessible with the people that you're talking about, your friends and so on, could be a great kind of way in, that to kind of like, to kind of make it that it's okay to talk about whatever is going on, would be really wonderful, I think.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Vincent. So as we're coming to the end now, that was the second last question. I've one more here, and it is from Anne. And Anne has an elderly mother, Vincent, in a nursing home. She's doing socially distanced window visits and finds that very hard. Understands that it's better than nothing. But again, is wondering, is there anything that she can do maybe to alleviate the loneliness of the situation?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So yeah, I mean, this is one of the great difficulties with COVID-19 is just what's happening in the care sector, nursing homes and so forth. At a time when, there's so much anxiety and so much uncertainty, is when we most need connection is actually when it's kind of unavailable, or it's kind of hard to access. So I reach out to both you and your mother in this situation in terms of like, all right, I feel for you both in this difficult situation. So it's like, how could you do this in a way that you could maybe connect more to your mother? It might be something around maybe write a letter to her where you could maybe express some of those concerns and maybe air them out, but also maybe talk a little bit about your lives together, remind her something about what she means to you, like, and how you miss her. Because I'm sure she misses you too, and I'm sure that having those feelings validated by, you both kind of naming them, maybe inviting her to write or dictate a letter back to you, that, I think, sometimes the old-fashioned habit of letter writing is something that we've lost, but actually something that nowadays maybe there's a new need for it, actually, in a way that that we could explore, and that's what I'd suggest to you, Anne, there.
Thanks very much indeed, Vincent, and I hope that's of some help, Anne. And actually, Vincent, we've one more question just in. I don't have a name, unfortunately. So this person says they're a very socially anxious person. Before the pandemic, their connection to people was mostly environmental. So they'd sit in a public place and just enjoy being part of the space with other people. Now, obviously, it's not advisable to do that from a COVID-19 point of view. And this person still has friends to talk to, but is missing that ease of being with people without having to actually interact with them in that more public setting. So wondering, have you got any particular tips on how this person might get the same benefit within the COVID situation?
Yeah, thanks, Goin. It's a good question, I think. And what really comes to mind for me is going for walks in nature. Going to like a park or somewhere where other people go for walks. And what I've noticed is people are actually more inclined to say hello now than ever before. And you can actually go for a walk. I'm not saying you have to say hello, but even just to nod the head or just to acknowledge. And this can all be very socially distanced and very safe. So I think there's a safety in nature and in our parks and our kind of like, our walks or by the sea, where, you might be able to have that experience of being around people where people are more relaxed, and perhaps you can be more relaxed. And it's like, we're in this together. We're all kind of soaking up a nice walk, or, whatever. Sea swimming is taken off huge as well. If that's something that anyone here, including yourself, is interested in. It's a shared experience, but it's socially distanced. And it's kind of naturally bringing up people's endorphins and feeling kind of more alive and more engaged and so on. So, I think that for me be one thing that I would suggest.
Fantastic. So Vincent, before we finish up this morning, are there any last tips or tricks that you'd like to share with us?
Just to remember that, you're not alone in this, and that we're all, doing our best. This pandemic has really tested everyone's resilience. And, it's an opportunity to grow and to find new strengths. So, like just even just to recognize how you have coped, like what has worked for you. It's like, oh gosh, I reconnected that old friend, or gosh, I really discovered a walk that I didn't know about. Thinking about these kinds of things, like where have you found your resilience, and kind of even digging into that a bit more. and acknowledging yourself to yourself, gosh, you know, like this is how I'm coping, and you know, I'm actually, you know, discovering resources or sources of support or sources of connection that I might have forgotten about, I didn't even know existed. So, and exploring new ones. You know, even if you just take one of those things that we talked about today that I brought up and say, gosh, yeah, I used to love violin, or I used to be really interested in a particular, like chess or a particular hobby. Maybe I'll go online and see if there's a chess group I can join, or some group who have an interest in, you know, composition when it comes to the violin or whatever. Just maybe rediscovering an old hobby or an old interest that might be an option as well, you know.
That's great. Vincent, thank you so much indeed. I, for one, have really enjoyed your presentation this morning, and I got a lot out of it. I hope that our attendees this morning did as well. So before I finish up, I just wanted to let people know that this is the second last of our current series, and the last webinar before Christmas will be next Thursday, that's the 10th of December, at 11 a.m, which is our usual slot. And our colleague Annalisa Nardini, who some of you will remember from last week, will be talking to us about dealing with difficult emotions. And I think certainly that's something most of the people that I know, including myself, would find very helpful, because as Vincent has said, COVID-19 has tested people's resilience in a way that very few things have in recent times. So that will be next Thursday, and it will be available for registration from tomorrow morning on Eventbrite, and we will be promoting it on our social media channels. So you should have plenty of opportunity to see it there. And I also want to remind people that this will be recorded. This event has been recorded, and I'll be making it available next week, probably the middle of the week, on our YouTube channel. Eventbrite will send you an email to let you know that how to access it through a YouTube link. And that's useful if you want to go back on any of the practices that Vincent shared with us today. So again, I want to thank everybody involved in making this webinar possible. And I want especially to thank all the people who joined us this morning, giving of your time. I hope that you found it helpful. I hope that you found it useful. And until the next time, from all of us here at MyMind, we wish you safe passage and look after each other. Thank you.